It's 6 o'clock in London, it's 1 p.m. in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 3 a.m. in Sydney, 10 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID live stream, Series 5, Episode 2, starts here. Welcome to Episode 26. In a defensive move, lest America gets more aggressive, lest you missed the last year, of course, when it was deemed vital by many to remove President Trump, to replace him with some other bloke who, it turns out, is arguably even more aggressive to China than his predecessor. Anyway, where was I? Yes, with American antipathy towards China unlikely to go away, Beijing has taken a move towards financial independence by deploying SWIFT technology for banking transactions as a defensive move against American machinations. Rumor has it the Chinese Institute of Archaeology is providing some programmers from their runic technology division so the Chinese banks can get to grips with the archaic SWIFT system. I can imagine the order of the day for those integration conversations. Remind me, what is the Mandarin for punch card? Is presumably the sort of statements that are being used at the moment in Chinese integrations across the banking system. Meanwhile, the UK antitrust body, the CMA, when asked the question, does 90% market share make a monopoly, answered to the crowd a resounding yes, which meant an equally resounding no to the proposed merger of UK crowdfunding market leaders Crowdcube and Seedrs. What a sensible decision. The notion the market leaders needed to merge to create an overwhelming monopoly to make a profit was undermined by their charges, 500 to 700 basis points. On those numbers, inability to profit is remarkable, where conventional exchanges are often pilloried for being deemed to profiteer by some on gross charges, which are circa 1,000th of the crowdfunding rates. Meanwhile, speaking of excessive interest rates, over in Ankara, where firing the central bank chief only caused an acceleration of the run on the Turkish lira, we had the reports that Turkish lira overnight swap rates spiked to 1,160% last week. Now that rather puts in perspective the running theme of the course of the last few weeks, which has been the excitement of the American bond market. In Washington, D.C. last week, 30-year US Treasury bonds peaked just below 2.5% per annum. All this and more has been covered in greater detail in Exchange Invest Daily, the unique newsletter of the Bourse business. Send us an email or hit me up on social media, Patrick L. Young, via whatever stream you're watching this show, and we can get you signed up to understand the exchange business. Meanwhile, please, ladies and gentlemen, send us a little love. Give us a like at the bottom of the screen. We would really appreciate it, and it helps the artificial intelligence wonder bots that do search engine optimization to encourage us to come forward. Good evening, Dr. Polashek, Michal Polashek at the University of Nikola Copernicus in Torun. It's a delight to see you this evening. One of many viewers who are here to hear from our guest, Colin Howard, this evening. In a fascinating episode, we're titling Innovation, Data and the Sovereign Individual. Colin is a pioneer of electronic data captured feeds from the forecourt. He installed some of the world's earliest electronic petrol pumps in, indeed, my native Northern Ireland, no less, during the 1970s. He was an originator in retail information systems, actually doing the first, as I remember, ever online credit card transaction. Your question today, ladies and gentlemen, drop it down in the comments. What was the speed of the modem through which that first electronic credit card transaction was taking place? Was it 10 megabits? Was it 20 megabits? Was it slightly less? I'll leave it up to you to have a think about what that could have been, and Colin will no doubt tell us soon. Colin was also the man who turned the Nepal Stock Exchange electronic, amongst many other things, in a series of commercial deals in the world of commodities. He created the first electronic dealing room in the City of London, which we'll get to in a minute, and he's also been involved, amongst other exchange technology ventures, with the likes of UNCTAD and indeed various putative exchanges around the world, including the Aruba Stock Exchange, amongst many, many others. Colin, good evening. Welcome to IPO-VID Live. Where in the world are you this evening?
Well, Patrick, if you triangulated where the War of the Worlds was set, with the first crematorium and the oldest mosque in the UK, you would end up in Woking, which is where you would find me, just down the road from the McLaren factory.
Just down the road from the McLaren factory. You're giving away there to the viewers the fact that we both have a bit of a passion for four-wheeled automobiles, especially those under the strain of speed. Yes, Woking, very interesting place. The epicenter in some ways of lots of motoring history actually has been all around you over the course of generations. But tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you come to be a technological guru and someone who was driven by innovation?
I was very fortunate, Patrick, in that when I was 17, my father asked me where I was going to live when I left school, and that forced me into the army. And in the army, I commanded the 1st Anti-Tank Guided Missile Platoon, which taught me electronics at a very young age. And I've been involved in learning electronics and ever since. And when you think about what you can do with electronics, it gives you ideas. And it's one of those ideas that I hope we'll be discussing today within your title of innovation, because it is an innovation. We're talking about data, and we're also applying it to the individual, the sovereign individual. Very good words for your title.
Well, thank you very much. The Sovereign Individual actually came from a book by, well, he's now, I suppose, most famous as being the father of the House of Commons these days, William Rees-Mogg, and he was Lord Rees-Mogg. He was an editor of the Times for many years, and he wrote a fantastic book called The Sovereign Individual about 20, 30 years ago, and I've always been quite fascinated by the term, and it comes to mind when we're talking about the whole issue, as you talk about, in relation to innovation and data and the sovereign individual. But before we get there, so you were engaged in the army, you learned all about anti-missile batteries and things like that, which must have been very exciting at the time, something that certainly sent you for a huge need for speed, as they're even faster than the best racing cars we can think of. You then came out of the army and very rapidly found yourself in another electronic venture.
In the oil industry, I learned about management, and I wrote an accounting package, which was actually paper-based, and started a company to run lots of forecourts for lots of oil companies. And the paper was coming out of our ears, Patrick. We were buried in it. And I said to myself, there's a solution to this. All we need is a data feed, and we can do this automatically. And it was that simple idea that created the electronic data capture. And the idea from then was that you could reorganize the entire movement of the shipping fleet, bringing petrol or whatever into the country, and you would know if you changed the price that you could sell it out. And that was the first concept of retail control systems, which was the name of our company in that time, in order to manage the stock and profit that a business was making, and that's grown exponentially. Within the UK, we have Nectar cards, and I think in almost every country that this is going out to will have some form of loyalty cards. And of course, paying for it had to be, in those days, originally with cash, and cash is an enormously expensive commodity to control, to count in and out of the bank all the time, to carry it there, to secure it. So the move to plastic became inexorable. But what I want to point out to you, Patrick, is that it took me 4 years to convince Barclaycard to even try an electronic transaction. And that's perhaps the point that we're coming to within this innovation game, that you can have the conceptual idea and you can have a clear vision as to what is possible, but then the adoption is extremely difficult. The bank inspectors specifically of Barclaycard said that they would never, ever allow an online credit card transaction without a signature. So in creating that very first online credit card transaction, we had to do an optical character recognition of the signature and transmit that along with everything else. Now, you asked about the baud rate. Has anybody come up with a guess in the meantime?
No guesses in the meantime. It's last call, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think that baud rate was for the first credit card transaction? Maybe we can tease you a little bit. We can tell you, when was the year? Was it 1975, Colin?
It was 1976.
1976. So there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, last call. So far, no guesses, actually. I'm quite disappointed altogether, audience. I would have thought you were going to be more engaged this evening, giving us a couple of runs. So 1976, Colin, see what you can say. Oh, actually, first of all, let me say thank you very much, Marianne Madeira. Thank you for the like. That's a delight to see. Helps us pop up the search engine optimization. As always, good to see you watching us on Facebook this evening, Marianne. Thank you very much. So tell us, what was that baud rate?
Well, the answer, let me preface the answer by saying that the baud rate of a telex machine is 75 baud. And the baud rate for T+2, that would have been great. The baud rate of the original mechanical Stroger exchange, which used to go click, 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 click as you dialed it, if you,
Yes.
Those of you remember that noise. That was the mechanical counters clicking across and making the connections. The maximum speed that would transmit data through was 200 baud. And when we did this first transaction, we were actually using a 4-bit processor. It was the Intel 4040, and in those days, it was still 8 people in a garage in California producing them.
Yeah. And Martin Watkins is quipping about T+2, and the in relation to the 75 baud of a telex, which I think is quite appropriate. So yes, indeed, people were in garages in a newfangled place called Silicon Valley, which nobody'd ever heard of, an exotic land. Who knows whatever came of it?
Well, I have had the great privilege of growing up with history, Patrick, you see, and all this innovation. And that what I would like to try and put across to your parish tonight is the difficulty of coming up with an idea and then getting that translated into live action. I'm going to make the prediction. It may be a prediction that I don't live to see, but the prediction I make tonight is that we are going to turn the entire control of data on its head. Today, every organization assumes that it collects information on its customer and that it owns that information on its customer, and it has a right to exploit that information on its customer. And the classic supreme examples are Google and Facebook, where they definitely exploit your data. I predict that in future, you as an individual, and this is where we come to the sovereign individual, you as an individual will control your data entirely yourself. And anybody who wishes to use that data will have to have consented connection to it. Then you will get the benefit of any monetization of the data rather than the likes of Google. You will be able to control who has what at what time. It may be extensive information you're prepared to share, or it may be very little. But certainly, it'll be a position where, to quote a term, you will only have to tell your story once. Every one of you today who goes online shopping has to answer a load of questions every time you take on a new supplier. They want to know your name, your address. Fair enough. Name, they need address for the delivery. Then they want your payment information. And every time you have to fill it in. Why? Why can you not have it on a template and they just connect to that template? And then the person selling you the information only needs your name to be courteous to speak to you. They don't need your address. The person who needs the address is the delivery company.
Mm-hmm.
And the payment company is the only person who needs your payment details. So I predict that this is going to be under your control within 10 years. But of course, it's a quantum change. It is every bit of software that we have at the moment is geared towards the macro control. And now we're talking about the micro control.
It's interesting, actually. We already got a couple of great comments coming in. I mean, Mujat Karatas, I was going to go to him first. Sorry, producer, just confusing you there. This means that the real ownership of your own data, which I think is absolutely getting to the nub of it, indeed. Kartik Swaminathan, I hope I've got that right, Kartik. Very true. Consent architecture is critical to give control to users. And I think that's very interesting because indeed the consent architecture mechanism is something that's been completely lost in the internet today. And isn't it ironic, Colin, that you and I, we've been on the internet and doing e-commerce for 25 years on the internet alone, let alone you've been doing it 25 years before there was an internet to do to it on. And sorry, you started at 200 baud, right? I mean, that's awesome for the credit card transaction. When you look at it that way, it's quite interesting because the brave new world of the sovereign individual of the internet was that we were all going to be hugely in control of everything. Whereas instead, what it seems to be is that the data's resting, as you say, with the other parties, and effectively the sovereign individual is going nowhere. And actually, there's no real innovation because it's just still a very large, old-fashioned corporate centralized model.
I'm keen when talking about innovation, Patrick, to remind people of a certain age, they'll remember it, but those a bit younger will not. Why did the IBM become the PC of choice to the world? And if I can quickly explain, it's because with the IBM XT, at a time when every single computer company had entirely different software, entirely different architecture, entirely different chips, deliberately, so that they could not be sharing with other people. They could not share their market. Everybody wanted to dominate the market with their unique architecture. At that time, IBM came out with the IBM XT, and the backplane of the computer, they published what's called the bus structure. They published the bus details of the computer. And what that meant was that anybody could produce an interface card and plug it in, and they knew that the top rail was 240 volts, the second rail was 5 volts, the third rail was 0 volts, and so on down the bus, so that they could design their own cards and put it into the IBM XT. And it was that open source approach which made the IBM XT the go-to PC for the world. It was the most brilliant and inspired bit of innovation by IBM, the like of which I can't think of any parallel to that. They completely transformed the computing industry. It was in 1982, I think. Yeah. I could stand corrected on that. But it transformed my world. And I think that by providing the equivalent of that backplane bus structure for every individual's data, we can transform the control world of the use of information. You see, there are a number of questions I think everybody should ask themselves. I've just written it down here, forgive me. Who knows your password? Where are your photos? What about the intellectual papers you've written? Where are all of these? Who has got control of them if you pass away? Now, I don't want to be too dramatic about that, but are we going to be entering a new digital dark age with all this distributed data? Or are we going to get a situation where we gather control of our data back under our control? Now, if we do that, let's say we do unfortunately pass away, we can leave instructions that all sorts of bits and pieces of that data can be parceled out. Our estate can be managed as per our will. We may have some special instructions that go to somebody, not our wife, if you follow me. And indeed, there may be children that we need to give some money to that the other children don't know about. So you can partition the instructions. How are you going to do that if you don't have any control of your own data? As I say, I think we're already in danger of going into a new digital dark age as we lose sight of the original code that things were written in. You talked about Swift earlier on, and yes, Swift is horribly antique to the point that it has absolutely no security checks in the data whatsoever, and that is why the Bangladesh Central Bank lost nearly £2 million in a fraud, and would have lost £1 billion if Deutsche Bank hadn't been on the ball. So if we lose the capability to read our 3.5-inch floppy disks that we had our old papers on, which I imagine most of us have lost that ability now, we certainly would have lost the ability to read those tape recorders that we used to dictate onto and give to our secretaries to type out. As I call it, the new digital dark age. We will lose our history, and I'm very keen that we get it back to being under the control of an individual and then consented. Then going a little bit further on, look how we can share that data with other people if we control it. One example, certification. If you happen to be a welder, say, let's say you're a welder with a qualification to dive to a depth of 300 meters. You're worth a fortune to the manufacturer of a oil rig, and you will be in great demand, hired by a contractor who will be working for one of the big oil companies. Now, are those certificates real, or are they photoshopped? Today, I read that 30% of Pakistan Airlines pilots' licenses are fraudulently produced. Interesting. How many, therefore, of the welders' information are also fraudulently produced? And what is the risk to the oil company, being the prime contractor over that builds of the rig? What is the risk to them? Now, if I had to have my personal certificate certified by the issuing authority and authenticated on my personal data site, and if I then gave consented access to that to the recruiting company, to the contracting company, and to the prime contractor, BP say, and BP were able to look through, not see who I was, not see what my address was. They don't need anything like that. All they need to do is to be able to look through everybody that's employed on their site and get little green lights come up. Everybody's got a valid certificate authenticated by the issuer. Quick check through, no problems at all. Now, ask yourselves, how could that possibly be managed in any shape or form today? And I think the answer is it can't. Anybody who in insurance who is insuring that rig hasn't any idea of what their risk is. It could be somebody. I saw a thing today where the wife said, "Darling, everything's all right. Your supper's on the top of the stove and the gas is already on. All you've got to do is light it." Well, I think that there's going to be a circumstance where that gas is going to be lit on that oil rig and it's going to blow up because the welder's certificate wasn't correct. And
so what you say, you're sitting telling us, so this world of Frank Abagnale, you know, Catch Me If You Can, that fantastic movie was made of this, where he had his own complete, I mean, he had an enormous printing press at one stage in the south of France knocking out frauds. It's a terrifying statistic, the idea that there are airline pilots on commercial airlines anywhere in the world managing to fly fraudulently. At the same time, it's quite fascinating, as you say, who's going to light the blue touch paper at any point in time and therefore cause the inferno in terms of what could be the data inferno for data and the sovereign individual. And I suppose that brings us to, we've got a couple of great comments coming in here, but also, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a question to ask, now's the time. We've got Colin Howard in the studio this evening. We're talking all about data, the sovereign individual, and effectively how that works going forward. So we'll be delighted to hear from you if you've got a comment you'd like to make, if you've got a question you'd like to raise. We had an excellent comment there, actually. First of all, Women on IT, thank you very much for saying it's a very interesting discussion. I totally agree. I think it's a fascinating conversation this evening. And then at the same time, Kartik Swaminathan, he's been in giving some very interesting comments this evening. He notes that India is creating a digital locker as part of the Indian stack for exactly this kind of purpose. Now, he asks the question, I guess there's something similar in the United Kingdom. I'm going to have to ask you to hold your horses on that for just a second, Colin, because first of all, I'd like to actually get to, I do believe it's Martin Watkins once again, who's complimenting your outstanding posts. It rather reminds him of Victory or Death. Well, you flatterer at that point in time. What can I possibly do but show a copy of Victory or Death, my fine book, with a forward by Jeffrey Sprecher, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, chief executive of ICE, who we saw this week, of course, inaugurating the new ICE Futures Abu Dhabi exchange just yesterday morning. So, great points, Martin. I mean, you say, I am intrigued to understand how financial exchanges, index providers, and those big four, the GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, will transform after we take back ownership of our own thoughts. So there's two great conversations to manage to get together. I'm going to come to Mujat Karatas in just a moment. So first of all, Kartik Swaminathan is asking, India is creating a digital locker as part of its Indian technology stack. Is there something similar in the United Kingdom? Colin?
No. But there is competition to provide some solutions in this space, and Microsoft offer a vault at this moment in time, and the founder of the World Wide Web himself has got a system. But the important
Berners-Lee, great man.
Berners-Lee, thank you, Patrick. Of course, the really exciting point to bring out, Kartik, is that none of us are going to be owning this. It is going to be you, sir, not an India digital locker. Part of an India stack? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Let's use that. But how are we going to all address this? We're going to have to come up with common, open standards. You as an individual are going to own that data. So how do we make that accessible to everybody? Well, one of the answers we've come up with is to use XBRL. Now, what is XBRL? Extended Business Relationship Language is a taxonomy that allows us to have different identifiers for different aspects of accountancy. It gives us a start. It means that if we want to have net profit after tax as a figure that we're looking for, then that's going to have a standard entry into the taxonomy. And whether it's the India stack, whether it's Microsoft Vault, whether it's Tim Berners-Lee's organization, or whether it's something we produce, ultimately everybody is going to have the same connectors. So if you're a travel company and or airline, let's take an airline, and you're looking for the person's passport to do the passport check, the passport has to be certified by the passport issuer, so it's not a fake passport. And once that's authenticated, the airline connects just to the passport, and then the pre-flight check is done on that. So any form of move in this is going to be terrific. But the fundamental fact is that if you're Google or Amazon or British Airways or anybody deciding to give the customer back their data, but you have access to it, then it simply isn't yours anymore. It is under the control of the individual. So you, Kartik, will have your own database, which only you can access. And everybody else has to have consented access to it. You control it. You own it. Now, of course, if there's a financial component to it, in the UK, we have to keep our accounts for 6 years plus current year. So if you bought something from somebody which forms a component of their balance sheet, they must still have access to that until they can lose it with retention. And of course, a great part of all this is the way the general data protection regulations play with the data. GDPR, which incidentally, Patrick, when you were searching the other day for something nice to say about Europe, I think GDPR is one of the great things that has been produced by Europe. It's very elegant code, very elegant law rather, and it has been, generally speaking, adopted throughout the world in the same way as international standards or the original British Standards Institute recommendations got adopted. It's even being adopted in California. It's not adopted, of course, in the United States because of the First Amendment. And I think it's going to be a while before the United States actually come to terms with personal privacy. But in that we do have the right to that personal privacy now, all these large institutions are at risk whilst they're controlling your data. If they lose the data, and these criminals are extraordinarily capable, they're utterly brilliant in the way they access it. Sorry, Patrick.
I can assert the First Amendment rights of a couple of the people who are asking questions here, Colin, and we can get to a couple of things now. Mujat Karatas, it's very, very interesting what you're talking about. Thank you very much, Kartik, for your question. I hope that's helped get you to an answer. Now, Mujat had earlier asked us, this means that the real ownership of your own data, he was talking about that. Now he's asking, what does that mean for employers?
Well, employers have to have certain amount of information on you, and if you want to be paid, then they must have access to your bank and your bank account. So they must have access to your details, which is fine. We just provide this consented connector for the time that you work for them, and if you stop working for them, then what do you want to do? You want to get another job, in which case you want to put yourself out with the recruitment companies. And do you want your data to go now to 1,000 recruitment companies? Do you think a recruitment company has any capability to look after data securely? I think the answer is clearly no. And you don't want that many iterations of the data out there anyway. So you would give them consent to access your data, which would give them immediately the answers to that they would need to sort out within their office anyway. When are you available? What are your skill sets? What sort of job do you want to go for? What sort of salary range you're aiming for? At the moment, a recruitment company has to have a vast data capability to analyze that and put it before their customer. If it's just a question of doing a scan of everybody who's available for a job in a cruise ship as a guitar player, then they will get a direct access to them. Possibly the cruise company will say, well, we don't need the recruitment company anymore. We'll just go straight to them. Thank you very much indeed. Maybe
an
that
interesting possibility for disintermediation there. And actually, disintermediation perhaps this brings us elegantly back during this evening's conversation about innovation data and the sovereign individual with Colin Howard. My name is Patrick L. Young. If you'd like to ask Colin a question, we've got 25 minutes of the conversation to go. This question that came up earlier on disintermediation sprang to mind immediately from Martin Watkins. He was complimenting you on the outstanding points you were making, and he's intrigued to understand how financial exchanges, index providers, and the likes of the GAFA, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook, will transform after we take back ownership of our own data. Colin?
Bizarrely, my recent information is that Google would welcome the access to people's data, but not owning it. And the purpose behind that is GDPR. They see only reputational damage coming from actually owning the data, whereas their business now is very well structured to exploit the data. Whether they could have got there without owning it in the first place is a moot point. But now that they've got those established connections, now, what if they then said to you, we've got an ability to conduct a survey, which, that's my dog walking in, conduct a survey which you will get paid £1 for. Google are going to earn £10, but you're going to earn £1. How many people would then say, oh, yes, I'll participate in that survey? Now you've got consensus-led control of the data. You've got revenue sharing going on with these mega organizations. And I think that would change people's attitude to Google and Facebook and Amazon tremendously. I also would like to just point out, Patrick, that very recently, if you're a vendor in Amazon, let's say you sell buckets and spades on Amazon's site, they now no longer allow you to have details of the customer they've sold it to. They say they're acting as the distribution medium, and the order is coming into Amazon. You're just a supplier. So you no longer have, within the Amazon current direction, you don't have control of your customer data. I think that's quite worrying. I think that's I can see why Amazon are doing it, because if they suddenly decide that they're going to be providing the buckets and spades, or they can make more margin by getting it from another supplier, then they can cut out your original supply position completely.
And of course, that's been a big risk with Amazon in particular in recent times. And it's very interesting. We've got another great question has come in, actually. Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much, Martin Watkins, for an excellent question altogether. I hope you had a lovely black tie dinner last week. Thank you, Colin, says Kartik once again, Kartik Swaminathan. Thank you, Colin. As I understood, we shall need a unifying standard across the Drift systems, which control with users, like we have IMAP and POP3 protocols for email interoperability.
Absolutely, sir. Yeah, completely agree. And this is not going to be owned by anybody. It's got to be developed on a consensus basis throughout the community, as indeed Tim Berners-Lee is promoting with his ideas. And Tim Berners-Lee, of course, gave us the World Wide Web architecture free. This will be the same. This is not going to make a new billionaire it's got to be very much a community project which everybody connects with. And of course, we are so privileged as people of our generation, our age, for the work that was done in the 70s by the early pioneers of the internet, who, remember, email was originally written in the 70s.
Yeah.
What amazing innovation capability they had. And that, of course, Patrick, brings me to the discussion we had yesterday on the very short line that imagination is more important than knowledge. And I'll allow you to suggest who said that.
I do believe that was Albert Einstein, because he wasn't only a genius, he was actually a very good thinker. And I think those two things can be remarkably separate at different points in time, depending on where people are. It's quite interesting. The whole concept of thinking seems to be something that's rather gone out of fashion these days, as does actually innovating. I mean, you're talking about data innovation and the sovereign individual. And I'm sorry, everybody seems to run around these days and has innovation managers and all sorts of people who are there to cause all sorts of upheaval, and nothing ever seems to actually change in these companies or in these organizations. I don't know, is it just me, Colin?
I'm sorry, I was reading what was on the screen, Patrick.
Generally, it seems to me that we have a remarkable amount of innovation being talked about, but it's rather like there's stasis, I mean, in some way, shape or form.
Innovation is extraordinarily difficult. It's extraordinarily difficult, in my view, because people are not promoted because of their innovation. You don't see people on their CVs, or you don't see advertisements wanted. Somebody to completely change our business model, somebody to rethink entirely what we're doing. You see somebody they want somebody in a job who's going to be the chief security officer, who will continue to do what the chief security officer before them did. And so innovation does involve imagination. How, and we've had examples tonight. Thank you, Kartik. You know, he's imagining how this can be. What have we got to create in order to make this happen? That is, if we get 50 or 100 of your viewers tonight thinking along those lines, that will be fantastic, and that'll be an extremely good yield. It is so difficult to get change accepted in the world. When I first started the first business internet service provider, I cannot tell you the number of people that I went to and pounding the streets, talking to them. Would you like to be connected to the internet? What? No, we'll never do that. Email? We'll never use email. And, you know, those answers were genuine at the time. The people didn't really know what email was. So how could they imagine what innovation it would create within their firm? However, I'm asking you all to think to yourselves, can you imagine owning your own data? And if you can imagine owning your own data, how do you then construct that? And once you've constructed it, how do you then share that with the rest of the world? Those are the challenges that are arising out of this entirely quantum paradigm shift. Is such a tediously overused phrase, but that's what we're talking about, Patrick, isn't it?
So it's another one of those things where we can apply the Copernican revolution, because we're turning everything from one orbit completely into the other, which is a very interesting amalgam. But at the same point in time, as we know, Rome wasn't burnt in a day. And there's obviously going to have to be a lot of immolation that goes on here. Now, how does that work? Because I can see a huge empire of people who their whole life has been garnered by holding data. How do we manage to get the data away from the data hoarders and allow ourselves the innovation of being sovereign individuals in a data world?
Well, I just would ask the question slightly the other way around, Patrick, and that's if we were starting today with a new project, why would we ever let them have that data in the first place? And I think online shops are a good example of where it will start to break down. We're all doing more online shopping, which means we're all filling up more forms every day to give our data away to yet another shop. And the time is going to come. Look, I've got this here on this little file of mine. Just connect to it and you can have it from there. I don't want to fill it up again. Enter password, enter email address, re-enter email address to make sure it matches, and then that dreaded word required comes up. Telephone number required. You can't even go and shop with me if you don't give me the required data. I think if there's an option, then people are going to very quickly go for the option. They're not going to give every airline their passport. They're going to say, connect to my passport. I mean, if I'm flying with you once to Australia, and I'll probably never go to Australia again. So I don't want Qantas to have my passport. Connect to it, I think.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, maybe you can walk us through this or give us an example of something you've been working on in relation to some of this data holding or alternative data distribution, for want of a better term.
Well, it's a very primitive project, Patrick, but it involves a visitor system. And I don't know whether you perhaps have got capability to show people what it looks like.
It's coming right now. Keep talking.
Okay, thank you. With a visitor system, I don't want you to have to give your name and address to every single organization you visit. I want you to have information on your phone which identifies you. And all you have to do is click on a QR code, and that records the fact that you visited them. It spreads from there. It can also be logging on clogging in rather to that organization to go to work. It can be entering the cruise ship. There's the start of it. We call it ID Me Safe, and it has you can create your own profile. You can, within the template, you can ask for the information that you want. So if you're visiting a school and they want the certificate to prove that you haven't just come out of prison, then that can be in there. It can have the car that you're driving, and also we offer this on a paper basis. So you can have it on your phone, or you can have just the QR code on a card, rather like you have a booking in slip on an airline, a boarding pass. So we can cover every aspect of it. Now, once you've got that profile of yourself in a visitor's book, how much more can you build that up? Do you, for instance, want us to have further details of your papers, your films, your photographs, your instructions to your estate should anything happen to you? Do you want to put that in there as well? Do you want to use it as a vaccination, a COVID vaccination certificate for travel, as we are likely to have? How is that going to work? Are we going to have some massive, macro, overwhelming organization which says, yes, this person's got his COVID certificate? If so, it's going to be fraudulently copied. It's going to be faked. It's not going to be real.
Didn't the UK try that? Isn't there something called track and trace, which ate the entire GDP of a small, medium-sized African country this year and actually delivered nothing?
Exactly, Patrick. And it's a great sadness. It relied on everybody having a smartphone. Everybody doesn't have a smartphone, and so it could never possibly work. And it was led by a lady who made a mess of everything she'd run before, including TalkTalk. And the budget.
That's the wonder of government. If you keep failing long enough, they make you president of the European Commission. But let's not get started on that. Actually, we've got a great comment from Kartik. Kartik, once again, Kartik Swaminathan, thank you very much for your questions and comments this evening, Kartik. It's been fabulous to have you on the show. And thank you, Colin. He says, I have made a humble attempt to propose a framework for innovation in my book, 3F, Future FinTech Framework. Sounds like an interesting tome, Kartik. We must endeavour to get ourselves a copy. Hopefully it's available not just in India, which I know is where you're very active in the FinTech community, but that sounds like a great tome altogether. Thank you for participating in the conversation this evening. And there's still actually 10 minutes left to manage to do so, ladies and gentlemen, just under, if you would like to ask another question or make a comment about what we have been discussing this evening in relation to data, innovation and the sovereign individual. We were really maxing out on innovation just before I interrupted Colin. So you think about innovation, Colin, what have you learned over the years in terms of ways you can actually try and make innovation happen?
I guess the fundamental first thing I've learned, and I think Kartik's just sold a few of his books, incidentally. The first thing I've learned is that it never goes where you're expecting it to. Yeah. Something always comes out of left field. Now, you very kindly mentioned earlier on how we pioneered data capture from forecourts for retail systems. I had a real interest from Shell in that project, to the point that they put a man on my board. But when it came to putting their hand in their pocket and actually investing in the capability, they held back. Oh, no, we haven't got the budget for that. And the innovation was actually carried forward by a guy called Eric McMullen running a funny little oil company in Ireland called Maxol. So an individual put his money down when the macro shell held back. What changed that? The Arab-Israeli war. When the Arab-Israeli war quadrupled the price of petrol and other oils overnight, suddenly the equipment that Shell had invested in would not physically set the price that the gasoline had got to. And a very major company called Wayne Dresser, as a pump manufacturer, had made no provision at all to deal with that. So what they had to do was to sign a contract with us overnight, which was very attractive indeed. And it got off the ground. But it was nothing to do with the value of retail data, which, as you know today, is fantastic value. No supermarket could exist for 10 seconds without that feedback and information on everything their customers have done. But it wasn't imagined in those days by the oil company chiefs of that time.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, the whole data explosion as we go through, and I'm going to talk about that in Victory or Death, and the way that we've really gone from, I mean, the whole of humanity essentially gathered about as much data by the early 18th century as one influencer is knocking out in about a year at the moment in terms of data produced. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, the numbers that we're talking about. Also, by the way, I noticed that Kartik, thank you very much for your message, Kartik Swaminathan. His book, 3F, Future FinTech Framework, is also available on Amazon UK. So it's available globally to all those of you who want to catch some of his suggestions for the future innovation framework. So the innovation framework, but I mean, I can't help but here, the message that comes through to me and what you're saying actually, Colin, is that very often there is a judicious dose of either luck or coincidence that seems to somehow or other come through. I mean, certainly no one in their right mind is going to manage to claim that in some way, shape or form, you as a demobbed army officer was able to influence the Arab-Israeli war, let alone that you would be able to find this small Irish petrol company who were crazy enough to decide that they would make pumps electronic. And I remember those pumps very well, actually, when they were first introduced, and I couldn't believe that they weren't in the mainland UK. It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, sometimes you just need a dose of luck or something else, that some sort of a little crisis from which you can manage to ultimately push your innovation forward.
Yes, serendipity is a fantastic thing. But what I try to do now, Patrick, is to remember all those reasons why I failed. Why, when we put what was an extraordinarily effective micro self-settling stock exchange structure into Nepal, why did it not go mainstream? Well, it didn't, partly because everybody was wedded to T plus settlement rather than T's equals zero. And something, I think T equals zero is inevitably going to be there in the end, but it's not going to be there for me because the train left the station, as far as I'm concerned. On other things, though, I have been extraordinarily lucky. The first digital dealing rooms in the city were created through our capability to do optical character recognition. The older members watching will remember when data was only on a television screen. It wasn't data, it was a picture of the price. And that picture of the price was jealously controlled by the likes of Reuters and Micronosis and names like that in those days. Now, if a naughty little outfit like ours came along and took a picture of the picture and digitized it in optical character recognition and rebroadcasted it as data, we caused a lot of problems. And that was the origin of the digital dealing rooms in the City of London. Then the Japanese were looking for a solution for Daiwa Europe. They had a lot of money and they were looking for a solution. They accepted our idea, and amazingly, they went against even the larger organization at the time that was meant to be taking all the lead decisions, which was Nomura. They put the investment in themselves to a product that the stock exchange had produced but failed to sell. So was that lucky? Was that the right place at the right time? Was it just knowing the right thing at the right time? Is somebody watching this tonight saying to themselves, we were going to go and create a vast central database of individual data, which will take us ages to build up? Whereas if we use this idea, we can let people keep their own data. And as long as we have access to the bit we need from it, we can build our business without any risk from the Data Protection Act or General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. So serendipity, luck, there's always some imagination behind it, but the main people who've got to be able to imagine it are those who actually, in the end, will make the most money out of it. The people who made the most money out of the electronic pumps were the oil companies and the pump manufacturers. The people who made the most money out of digital dealing rooms were the banks that bought the dealing rooms. So ultimately, other people benefit from having the imagination to adopt the innovation that small organizations like mine and Kartik and other dreamers and thinkers produce. What we would like to ask your audience to do, Patrick, is please use your imagination. Consider how we can actually innovate within it. I say to you that if we started today, we would never, ever let anybody else have our data. But 30 years ago, it was only the big controllers of data who had the computers to store it all. And that's why they got away with it. It's time we took back control, took it back to ourselves, owned it ourselves, benefited from it ourselves, and allowed our relatives to keep the valuable data that we create in our lives going forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, time to take back control. Gosh, that could be a great political slogan, or possibly the bane of some people's lives, depending on how it's used. Colin Howard has been with us this evening discussing innovation data and the sovereign individual, and I think it's been a rousing call to arms. The opportunity to manage to hold our own data, to therefore push ourselves forward. And this coming from a man who genuinely knows every single baud of his data throughout the course of his life. The first ever online credit card transaction undertaken at 200k baud, something which is essentially less than the blink of an eye in the modern Zoom culture, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mudat Karatas, and you say thank you very much. It's been most educating. I agree completely. It's been a fascinating opportunity this evening to hear from a genuine expert in the field, rising us towards greater innovation, rising us towards the idea of controlling our own data, and someone who's not afraid to demonstrate the fact that from various previous failures have come incredible successes, whether it was the electronic petrol pump that I remember so well from my childhood being seen on the streets of Belfast and a few other parts of the world. And that was, of course, driven by so many coincidences as well as the actual drive to innovate. We have had a rousing conversation today. Thank you very, very much to Professor Michał Polaszczyk in Poland, Kartik Swaminathan. Thank you very, very much. And we'll check out your book, 3Fs, The Financial Framework. That looks like a really, really intriguing effort altogether. And thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you, Patrick, for this wonderful session with Colin. I think actually I would say thank you, Colin, for this wonderful session with Patrick, because I've purely been a bit part expert this evening, facilitating what's going on. Mudat Karatas, it was great to have your various interactions as well. Martin Watkins, a joy to hear from you as usual, and also Women on It. And speaking of Women on It, we're going to have a week off. Thank you very much for the kind words, Martin Watkins, another superb IPO-VID. Many congratulations. That's coming, of course, from a previous alumni of the series. Good grief, over 20 episodes ago now, Martin. How time flies. Thank you very much for the comments, Martin. Mention of Women on It reminds me that I do believe there's a great Women on It show coming tomorrow evening to a stream somewhere near you. And significantly, we're going to have a week off for Easter if we haven't managed to subsume too many Easter eggs during lockdown over that period of time. We'll be back the week after, looking perhaps a little bit calorifically enhanced. We won't need any of the graphics, and we're going to be looking at the idea of talking blockchain. We're going to be talking blockchain with Sandra Rowe. She's a very experienced parishioner in the world of exchanges, but most significantly nowadays is the chief executive of the Global Blockchain Business Council. That's coming up on the 13th of April in 2 weeks' time. It only remains for me to wish anybody who wishes to celebrate a very happy Easter, whether or not that's your religion or not. Well, let's do one thing, ladies and gentlemen. Let's follow the sagely advice of Colin and try to look after our data, whether we're celebrating Easter or however we look forward towards the next couple of weeks. We'll be back in a fortnight. Thank you very much to the production team. It's been a pleasure to work with you as always. Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Beata. Thank you, Veronica. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thank you very much for watching this IPO-VID. We'll be back in 2 weeks. If you need anything in the meantime, check out wherever this stream is. You can catch all of the previous issues. That's 25 different episodes easily on a data stream. And they're all much more than 200 baud too. Thank you and good evening.